Are you tired of the noise and the spin? Do you want the real story behind the headlines? I'm Jake, and this is Politics by Jake, where I tell you what they won't. And now we're going even deeper, and I need your help to keep doing it. Join me on Patreon and support independent political analysis that doesn't pull punches. You'll get insider breakdowns, you'll get bonus clips, and first access to new content. So go to patreon.com/politics by Jake. That's patreon.com/politics by Jake. No filters, no fluff, just the truth. Let's do this together. And all right, it's the 28th. Holy cow, another month gone. The next time I do a show, it's going to be August 1st. Can that be possible? Hold on, let me check. Yep, that's right. Friday's show is going to be the August 1st. August 1st, another month gone. Imagine that. Well, it's me, Jake. This is Politics by Jake. And we've got a lot of important things to talk about today. And I'm kind of excited to do that. Of course, you know, we do the bi-weekly Monday and Friday thing, 7 a.m., KCAA. The recording's done in Los Angeles, but the flagship is in Loma Linda, California. That's kcaradio.com. You can go there and you can listen to my show. You can also pick it up as a podcast. Just go to the Monday-Friday schedule, and it's there. So let's get started. The recent thing, and you know, Republican and conservative politics, they have long since fallen into the gutter, and they've gone underneath the gutter. If there's something lower than the gutter, it's gone there. And what is the most recent thing, and I'm sure you've heard of it, is that Trump has accused Obama of treason, and he claims to have incontrovertible proof of his guilt. But all he's able to come up with are documents that actually point to his own guilt. His own collusion with Russia is pretty much unquestionable. His own insanity. And he did this in the Oval Office a few days ago. And when this kind of sacrilege occurs, and this is kind of why I'm leading with this, because there's other stuff, there's big stuff to lead with, but this actually, you'll excuse the expression, trumps it. American citizens have to begin to look at the choices they have, not only for themselves, but for the country, for our country and our future. And because not only of these things, but for all the things that went before, I mean, including, but not limited to, how that Donald Trump fomented, promulgated, and prosecuted not only a legislative coup and insurrection, but a violent insurrection against these United States. And for that, you've heard me talk about it before, I'll just mention it in passing, check out the Colorado Supreme case called Griswold v. Anderson. He absolutely, positively was found guilty of that. Go and read it. You will find out for yourself that he has been found guilty by a court of competent jurisdiction, the esteemed justices of the Colorado Supreme Court, that he was guilty of insurrection. And as a consequence of that, according to the 14th Amendment, which these fascists, the 14th Amendment is one of the three Reconstruction Amendments. The 13th Amendment is no chattel slavery. The 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, the use solely, and many other things, honoring the dead of the United States. The 15th is voting rights. And the oligarchs, the financial criminals who run Wall Street, have been trying unceasingly to destroy the new birth of freedom. But we have to realize all people who care about this country have to realize that Donald Trump can no longer remain the president of the United States. Whatever there is in the so-called Epstein files that incriminate him in whatever crime or bestiality or abuse or just whatever it is. This is a person who inexplicably, after all that he's done, still retains the all too real powers of his office. And this is a man who is ill-suited even to be so much as to be elected as a dog catcher. But as president, he's a danger to the life of every person in this country and every person on this planet. So why, did he accuse Obama of treason? Well, I mean, he's doing whatever he can do. It's just another thing that's available. It's a sign of his desperation that he's even trying it. And this is the addled mind that he has with regard to this. There's members of the Supreme Court that Trump himself appointed, including one he was able to appoint only because of a manipulative and unethical political trick that was enacted by his party while he was running for president, have created a virtual blanket immunity for presidents for acts committed while in office. So, consequently, it's not possible for any president to be guilty of any of the crimes that Trump has alleged about Obama, even if they were remotely true, because Trump made sure that there are no crimes that any president can be guilty of. So I think the 14th Amendment is still available, although I'm really concerned and very disappointed in Congress that on January 6th, which is supposed to be known as Certification Day, where the Congress sits and the Vice President basically reads out the votes and certifies and confirms that the person who got the most electoral votes is the President of the United States. I think that that's still available. I think that a vote of acclamation can be taken, but I'm really disappointed in it. But there are still things that can be done. And this is one of the things that I think needs to be done. Governor Newsom has recently floated the idea that he's going to withhold the taxes that would ordinarily be due to the federal government. And I think that this is an excellent idea. And moreover, I think that the leaders of the Democratic Party, the governors of the key Democratic-led states, former President Clinton, members of the Supreme Court that President Clinton and Obama appointed, key business leaders of this country need to meet in conference to attempt to fend off the coming disaster. And like I said, make no mistake, it is coming, that Donald Trump seeks to inflict it on this nation and on this world. And to stop it with actions that would shame a Soviet leader or a medieval king. They should give life to the idea voiced by Governor Newsom that his state should no longer pay the expenses of the so-called red states, whose economies are such. And this is the crazy thing about this, because in the red states are those who are most vocal against the largesse of the federal government, and yet it is they who receive the largesse because of the power and the ability and the remunerative ability of the blue states. Governor Newsom has suggested, in effect, a tax boycott. At such a conference, those who want to save America should propose an organized and safe process for all the states to participate in this tax boycott and assume all the risks so that you as citizens bear no risk. There should be an analysis and an organization to propose a national strike, because national strikes really work. The cap putsch was brought down in 1919 because the workers called a general strike. This is why Stalin said that the workers were the enemy of the people, and that the Nazi Party was much, much less dangerous, because the workers could do a national strike. And it basically shut down. The Cap Putsch was 1919. There is a guy named Cap. There is a military guy named Witkin or something like that. And they basically tried to shut down the Weimar Republic, which at that time was like, to do so would be like to strangle it in the cradle. It only lasted about 14 or 15 years as it was. But they tried to strangle it in the cradle, but the trade unionists and the workers did a strike. They did a general strike. And they stopped it. And Cap and Witkin had to flee. General strikes are powerful. They shut everything down. And if we did that, you could find out who the real owners of this country are. An America that was subject to a general strike, a dictatorship run by a minority of unproductive racists, they would flee, just like Cap did. The conference should propose legal, peaceful means to remove Donald John Trump from office immediately. It's a serious stuff. I'm absolutely serious about this. Remove many of his fervent and least mentally well acolytes and enforcers like Tom Homan, like Stephen Miller. And replace his administration with a bipartisan, multi-party one that can serve to undo the damage he's already inflicted as a form of caretaker government until the midterm elections. This is quite serious. I just totally think that this ought to happen until the midterm elections of 2026, which you've heard me say, I'm not even sure they will occur. Everybody talks about, the elections of 2028. Donald Trump got up before a religious group and said, vote like hell in 2024, because by 2028, we'll have it fixed and you'll never have to vote again. You know why? There won't be any elections. And I think that his government has been so depraved that I think he knows that he has to have this fixed by 2026 and not 2028. But anyway, a conference that will hopefully put us back onto the path of the tolerant, a diverse, multi-party nation, which we all grew up in, and which you and I and our parents and ancestors have thrived in since 1776. President Lincoln said during the heated debates between him and Senator Stephen A. Douglas, where the main topic was slavery and its expansion into new territories, Lincoln sought to clarify his opposition to slavery's spread while navigating the complex racial attitudes of his times. And he said, disenthrall yourselves. Disenthrall yourselves, my countrymen, he said, and resolve to be free. He said, I do insist that there is no right on the part of any man or set of men to enslave another man against his consent. Disenthrall yourselves, he said, my countrymen, resolve to be free. I say this to you, disenthrall yourselves, my countrymen, and resolve to be free, because a fascist dictatorship has got control of the government and wants to take away your freedom. And they're doing it. It's happening right now. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake to tell you you're not crazy. The system is rigged. Help us say it louder, won't you? Join us at patreon.com/Politics by Jake. All right, this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And I want to preface the next segment with the following clip. Go ahead and take a listen to this.
Sir, how much did you personally know about the existence of concentration camps or death camps?
Almost nothing. Auschwitz was in Poland. It was pretty much Jewish. The prisoners in Dachau were only about 16% Jewish. They went way back from German Protestants and various people that Hitler didn't like, thrown in as early as 1933 when the camp opened. Then they threw in gypsies, homosexuals, anybody they didn't like over the period. And then when the invasion of Russia took place, hundreds of Russians were captured. This was an awful thing. The Russian officers were sent to Dachau, and they were told if they would run down the field and get away, they would be freed. And they did, but they were all shot in the back. It was just a real murder scene. At the very end, the Germans wanted to hide what had happened in the other camps, and that's the reason that they sent all these poor victims down by train. They were alive when they put them on the train, to get them away so that presumably the Westerners wouldn't see what had happened.
Okay, and we're back from that short little clip. I want you to remember that as we go into what the next segment, which is basically going to be about an executive order on July. If all these other things weren't enough going on, remember, there's this agenda that Trump lied about in 2024. He said he didn't know anything about it. It is called Project 2025. And it has all sorts of parts to it, and this is one of them. All right, so as I said, on July 22nd, 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order aimed at combating homelessness, ostensibly, mind you, and improving mental health services across the United States. The order directs federal agencies. I mean, this sounds good on its surface, or at least it sounds reasonable. The order directs federal agencies to coordinate efforts to provide better support for homeless individuals, especially with those, like the ones that Ronald Reagan threw out. No, I'll get to that. Especially those with serious mental illnesses. Key provisions include increased funding, allocation of additional federal funds to states and local governments, specifically targeting programs for homeless individuals with mental health challenges, interagency coordination, mandates enhanced collaboration between the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Veterans Affairs to streamline services. Mental health services expansion expands access to crisis intervention, psychiatric care, community-based support programs aimed at preventing homelessness related to untreated mental illness. Housing initiatives encourages the development of more supportive housing facilities that combine shelter with integrated mental health care. Data sharing and tracking establishes a national database. This is kind of ominous, actually, to track progress, improve resource allocation for homeless populations with mental health needs. Executive order on combating homelessness and expanding mental health services by the authority vested in me as President of the United States of America is hereby ordered as follows. And it goes on from there. And that's basically it. What I've described to you is basically it. But, let's dig deeper into this. This is a subject that's urgent, it's complicated, it's deeply intertwined with our nation's troubled past. I would argue that the reason why this exists is a creature of the modern Republican Party. There have always been homeless people. There's no doubt about it. On the surface, the order looks like a positive step, increasing funding for mental health services, expanding supportive housing, pushing federal agencies to work together. It's pitched as a compassionate effort to help some of the most vulnerable Americans. But history teaches us to look beneath the surface. We have seen similar policies before. Policies cloaked in the language of care and efficiency, yet which led to human suffering on a massive scale. Back in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler's regime launched the infamous T4 euthanasia program. Under the guise of public health and social welfare, this program targeted the disabled, the mentally ill, other marginalized groups, labeled them, called them unworthy lives. The state systematically murdered tens of thousands of these in secret, an act of brutality justified by twisted notions of racial hygiene and economic necessity. And the chilling thing is how the rhetoric used then about public safety, community health, managing societal burdens, echoes in some of today's political discourse. It's a stark reminder that language can be weaponized to justify cruelties. Fast forward to the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan's policies resulted in the mass closure of mental houses. This so-called deinstitutionalization was intended to integrate patients into communities, but was poorly managed. That is saying the very least that can be said, that it was poorly managed. Threw people out onto the street without adequate outpatient support or housing. Hundreds of thousands of mentally ill individuals ended up homeless, neglected. I remember some in the middle of the night sleeping on heating grates, exposed to dangers on the street. This is Ronald Reagan. This is the modern Republican Party. This is St. Ronnie. The ripple effects of this policy still haunt us today, and they can contribute directly to the crisis that the Trump administration now claims to address. And here we are in 2025, Trump signing an executive order aimed at that very crisis. Homelessness entwined with untreated mental illness. But let's be real, shall we, about who Trump is? He's a grifter. He's a con man. He's broken the law repeatedly. He's driven by self-interest, a desire to avoid prison. This is not a savior. He's a survivalist. He's looking out for number one. However, Trump is not acting alone. Behind the scenes are even more dangerous figures. Stephen Miller, whose hardline immigration policies strip away basic human rights. Kristi Noem, the dog killer, with her authoritarian streak. Tom Homan, the former ICE chief, known for ruthless enforcement. These are ideologues who thrive on control and punishment more than care or compassion. So while Trump's executive order may sound promising, we have to be vigilant. There's a very real risk that it could become another tool for marginalizing vulnerable people rather than lifting them up. The question you have to ask, and it really needs to be asked, are we heading towards a system that truly supports homeless people with mental illness, or are we being set up for another cycle of neglect, coercion, or perhaps worse? This is not just about policy. It's about morality. It's about how a society treats its weakest members. Remember, history is not just a record of the past, it's a warning. The horrors of the T4 euthanasia program didn't happen overnight. They were enabled by a government willing to write off human lives in cold bureaucratic terms. And the legacy of deinstitutionalization still leaves millions suffering in the shadows. Trump himself is flawed, to be sure, but the forces behind him, the ones shaping the machinery of power, they could easily, as history shows, take us down an even darker path. So we need to watch closely We need, at the very least, to demand transparency. We need to demand accountability. We need to fight for dignity and rights for all people, especially those weakest ones who society often forgets. Because if we forget those lessons, we risk repeating the tragedies of history. That is a challenge and a responsibility that we face today. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise. And this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And as a preface to this segment, I remember once that I went, it was some time ago, I went to the Miami Zoo. It was nice, always nice in Miami. I remember the monkey exhibit. And there they were chimpanzees. They were behind bars. And they were touchy. They resented being looked at. And so they started throwing their own feces, at the people in the crowd. And they thought that was funny. They thought that was so great. They could throw it a long way, too. Until some people in the crowd started throwing it back. This really happened. And they just didn't, the monkeys just didn't like that at all. That just drove them wild with rage. So, going on with this thing that we're talking about Trumpenstein, the horror show that won't go away. Trump, as I said at the beginning, wants to lock up Obama. That's the most recent version of the clarion call of Trumpenstein to try to throw feces against the wall. Just to do anything that will get the people off their fascist backs, including their MAGA enablers. But as I said, gee guys, didn't your clique on the Supreme Court majority, even maybe more than them, start telling us that it is impossible to hold a president criminally responsible for actions undertaken in his official capacity? Well, I think that's important. I mean, if Trump is immune, then Obama is immune. Biden is immune. Clinton is immune. Even Bush the Younger would be immune. And this is all the flawed logic, the debilitated thinking of these kind of regimes. So where does this come from? Let's try to look at the deeper psychological well springs. It pretty much goes like this. Fascism, fascist mass movements, phenomena of this type, they generally arise after tremendous crises in society. Notice it's something that's somewhat limited to the modern era. In other words, there's you look at Carl Schmitt, who I very occasionally have talked about on this show. He was Hitler's lawyer. Hitler's lawyer, Carl Schmitt, writes books where he quotes a Spanish theoretician, Donoso de Cortés. Donoso de Cortés is there to say to people, 1900, something like that. He says, look, There are no more kings. In other words, the era of monarchy is over. Modern society, in its complexity and communications, already by 1900, had left the phenomenon of monarchy in the past in terms of any real power accruing to the king. There are no more kings. And therefore, the governments in the modern era are generally going to be conducted against Parliament, against the Prime Minister, against a president, or against a Congress, things of this sort. And they're going to function with fascist mass movements and coup d'etat, and I think that holds up. But how does it happen? It requires a whole different thing. You can't do a palace coup. Palace coup won't work because the role of the palace is not what it was. So therefore, what you've got to do is you've got to get the masses in motion. You've got to unleash mass forces against the people that you're dealing with. So what kind of people can you recruit? Well, here's we get into this thing, okay? So look, Mussolini, March on Rome, 1922, Hitler, seizure of power, 1933. Hitler actually started with the beer hall putsch in Munich in 1923. So like a year after Mussolini, and one wonders whether Hitler was inspired by Mussolini, because we know that Hitler had great respect for Mussolini. So 1922 and 1923 is the first time Hitler tried to do something. But they're both war veterans. They're both from the trenches of World War I, the Western German French front for Hitler, and for Mussolini, it's the Austrian front. It's the Isonzo River front. There were 12 or 13 attacks by the Italian general who was at Cardona. But the idea is that basic troops of fascism are disgruntled war veterans. They have always have that. And then on top of that, you can add angry workers, shopkeepers who have lost everything, people who have undergone trauma in their lives in order to qualify as what? Broken souls, wounded souls, people whose previous ideas of their lives cannot be maintained. And they have to get into a mode which I would call vicarious living. And this is not exactly psychological jargon, but it's clear enough what it means. You've got to be driven down so low that you give up on your own life and you decide to live just about only for the success of somebody else. That's the moment where you can find a political leader, charismatic if possible, not sure I'd call Trump that, but whatever, who can seemingly express some kind of support for you, some kind of understanding for you, reaches out to you, or you believe it. You delude yourselves. Many times you delude yourselves at the hands of false populists. Then we can get into a phase called narcissistic symbiosis. Symbiosis is a kind of mutually beneficial, mutual relation between the charismatic leader, the duce, the caudillo, the doge, the conducator in Romania. That person is somehow, you've transferred your hopes and your dreams to that person. You blame the enemies of that person for everything bad. And that's sort of where the movement comes from. You've got to have people who have really been beaten up, really been beaten down, deprived of everything, but they feel they still have some significance and meaning by supporting this false populist movement. And that is what it is. It's false populism. And this is important to understand, because it is wrong to say that the people supporting Trump are simply that they were born fascist or something like that. Although Edward the King, his biographer, the one who married Wallis Simpson, had to give up the kingship. even his own biographer said he was like a natural fascist. So there are such things. But it would be wrong to say that these wounded people were born fascist. But it's more like this. They've been reduced to a state where they might decide to go down this path. And that's how it starts. This is why you cannot expect to use the Platonic dialogue method, for example, really at all with this movement. And people try. And you see people try, and you see on the shorts and on the reels and on the videos that the people they're talking to, they never get it. They won't even accept your facts. They won't accept your arguments. They're kind of pre-programmed to reject any criticism of the Duce, the Fura, the Codillo, and so forth, Le Guide. I don't know, did Petain get to be Le Guide? I think he probably did. But you can't entertain criticism of this book because it's not rational. The whole phenomenon is, by definition, irrational, even though it is lawful, and consequently it can't be understood using the ordinary parameters. And so that's how the broken souls go, from individual drifting broken souls into narcissistic symbiosis, therefore becoming a movement, which we can then call collective insanity, mass psychosis, things of this sort. Now, previous to this moment, there is only one way out of this for the inducer, the charismatic one at the top, to be removed by whatever means, to cease political activity, to go into exile maybe. But as I say, the reason I was bringing up, and you've heard me bring up, and the person's name, I really haven't said her name before, it's Masha Gessen, who said that the United States, and you have heard me say this, has the most powerful, the most resilient, the strongest kind of civil society in the world. And it's the fact that instead of taking a direct path to dictatorship, whoever is going to do it, they have to make all kinds of concessions to public opinion, because we still have the formal remnants of democracy that we have with us, and that slows them down and may even do more. So as I do in the show, I talk about things that you can do. It's really up to you, right? Make sure that you're aware of this, will you? And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake to tell you you're not crazy. The system is rigged. Help us say it louder, won't you? Join us at patreon.com/Politics by Jake. Okay, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And I wanted to talk about a couple of things. I want to follow up on what we were talking about in the last segment about the demoralization of the people that leads to this narcissistic symbiosis, which what Jung would call, Carl Jung, the 20th century psychologist, would call the wounded leader. And I want to go through 3 or 4 maybe 4 points if I can get to them, of what are kind of the credenda, the creed, the points in the creed of this movement, to show you where this comes from and how the genesis of it all may then guide you towards understanding why it's falling apart these days. But I really wanted to talk about this thing about the strength of civil society that I was talking about towards the end of the last segment. The resistance against fascism. You remember I said at a certain point, those of you who listen to the show quite a bit, that it is up to the institutions of this country to defeat fascism. Because the fascist cabal, you hear me say it many times, has taken over control of the government. That has happened. The resistance against this fascism, it's remarkable. I think it takes me back to this comment that I said it was made by a Russian journalist, Masha Gessen, a Russian journalist. She took refuge, I guess, in the United States, and she pointed out a couple of years ago that the United States, and now listen to this, this is good, the United States, in her view, has the strongest civil society in the world. Now, what does that mean? What's civil society? Well, civil society is commonly understood as being everything above the family, right? In other words, it does not include the individual human family, like mother, father, children, or just partners or whatever combination there is. It should be encouraged in a time of tremendous social dilapidation, but from the family up to the government, in other words, from the upper limits of the family to the lower limits of the government, that's what you define as civil society. So what is it? Well, it's clubs. It's sporting association. It's political parties. It's institutions like universities, newspapers, television networks, any kind of group phenomenon coming together for some purpose. It's just whatever it is. Coin collecting, stamp collecting, butterfly observation, bird clubs, just anything. Associations of people with coming together for some purpose. It doesn't matter. People with special academic interests, historical interests, churches, obviously, a very big part of civil society are that. And in Gessen's view, the United States has the strongest kind of civil society anywhere in the world. And I think there is a significant truth in that. And even though, if you're an ultra-left, of course, you're going to take pride in the fact that you're so decadent that you can't be patriotic, but nevertheless, I think that there is a moment of patriotism in all this, that the resistance so far against this totalitarian, fascist, dictatorial government has been, I think, quite remarkable. And it shows every sign of growing. It's not going away. For example, a key stat would be, according to the latest CNN poll, 36% of Republicans reject and disapprove of the way the Trump administration has been handling the Epstein question. That is a very serious thing. And this character, Harry Enton on CNN, was talking about his words for this were horrendous, awful, tragic, cataclysmic, whatever it is, because that's the incumbent president's own party that's doing that. And what seems to be, at least at the moment, one of the key issues, again, with all the caveats I can put on that, that it shouldn't be so, but it is so. So let's get in there, okay? You're not going to sit on the sidelines, turn up your nose at reality. You can't afford to do it. Reality is there. You may not like this world. You've got to live in it. So I would say live in it already, okay? Okay. Now, let's get back to what we were talking about last segment, like I said, demoralization of the people as it leads to this narcissistic symbiosis, which Jung would call the wounded leader. So, first of all, you have the wrecking of the world economy, and this, by the way, is going on right now. But I'm referring to globalization. The transformation from a modern industrialized economy with tangible physical production. So, in other words, when I say that, I mean agriculture, industry, housing, public works, and so forth, into this post-industrial lunar moonscape that we have covered with craters and, God knows what. So it's deindustrialization, service economy. These are disasters. And this was promoted by Wall Street. And what you're going to notice is that most of the things that I want to talk about as causes of Trump have to do with the crimes of Wall Street. You've heard me talk about Wall Street as the criminals who run Wall Street. And it's an important point to say that when you have a large minority or even a majority, it depends, of people who are profoundly discontented with the current situation, you've got to pay attention to that. But what you don't want to do is to believe the remedies or accept the remedies that these victims propose. Why? Because generally, they're not going to give you a clear picture of a warped reality. They're going to give you a warped picture of a warped reality. And it may lead you to exactly go in the wrong direction. And that's pretty much, honestly, what's happened. So, okay. What's the carnage on the economic front? Well, you've heard me go through it before. I'll go through it again. In about 1989, 1990, 60,000 American factories were shut down. That means 60,000 communities multiplied by 10, 20, 50, 100, 10,000 factories shut down. The decline of the industrial power that had taken over the world in the 1890s, that won World War I, but also World War II in particular, and that was essentially just thrown overboard by Wall Street so they could get cheaper labor in the third world. And this was at least one study from about 1967 that talked about this and said what's coming is a third stage of imperialism. We are going to have a runaway shop. We're going to have to outsource it. We're going to have to offshore all kinds of production. That's going to be the rule, all right? So that's 60,000. Trump, I heard him once, he claimed 70,000. I think 60,000 is more right. But 60,000 is already more than enough. All right. And then going along with that, since the service economy, these are lousy, dead-end jobs, low wages. So therefore, as you get fewer and fewer highly skilled industrial jobs, more and more low-wage service jobs, you have cut the standard of living in half, minus 50% or more in certain areas. And it doesn't show up in the statistics because a lot of it has to do with the cost of education, insurance, health care, things like that, which are not sufficient. They have not been reflected enough in the typical market basket from the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the Labor Department, right? The BLS, inflation, in other words, buying power. So 1/2 of your living standard is gone. It's also certainly a fact that nobody seems to register that the media or the newspapers don't really say, hey, Americans, the headline is this: you've lost half of your standard of living. And here's why they don't tell you that. They're in on it. So what it leaves then is the individual, this left-infused realm where you're really hurting and you don't know why. And do you blame yourself? Who do you blame? You got to find somebody to blame. And at that point, along comes some conspiracy theorist to tell you that this is the deep state. Now, let me point out, at times there is a deep state. But normally, the deep state is not a name that you would recognize. You can't tell me that Obama is the deep state or that Biden is the deep state. In other words, prominent elected officials, especially presidents, there's nothing deep about them. They embody certain features of the state, but they're not deep. So parallel government, secret government, alternative government, these are real and they do pop up. But all that means is that there are networks. And this is really the correct way to look at it. Networks inside the federal government that have certain policy goals, which may or may not be those of the current administration, and that's just a fact. That doesn't mean they dominate. They may pull in one direction, but they may or may not prevail. And of course, it doesn't mean that they're all pedophiles. The pedophile stuff seems to be a big emotional center of gravity for a lot of these people, I guess because it doesn't take a whole lot of sophisticated political, economic, military, strategic analysis. It's just this monstrous crime against children. So it's pretty much something that everybody can understand, except for mentally ill persons. However, it doesn't really explain anything. And in order to try to counteract this phenomenon, you need to have some policies. And most of the time, they don't. They think Trump is bringing those. So anyway, second, forever wars. First, the Vietnam War, to the Iraq War, the Afghan War. You remember George Bush the Elder's inaugural address, 1988, he said, I'm going to make sure that the Vietnam complex, the Vietnam syndrome ends. In other words, great reticence to start foreign adventures, foreign military interventions. So Bush comes on the scene, Bush the Elder, in 1988 and says, I'm going to turn all that around. And he did. Panama first, and then Saddam in the early 90s, under the guidance of Margaret Thatcher, who transplanted backbone to British Plus. All right. So you got the idea, right? Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Gulf War, Libya, so on. You got me? These are the forever wars. Now, the third point would be domestic covert operations. Many of these highly suspicious, not all proven, some proven more than others. We're talking JFK, we're talking RFK, we're talking 9/11, and we're talking about a whole series of things, right? Waco, Ruby Ridge, so on, the Atlanta Olympics, just an endless series of domestic covert operations. In many cases, the official version of these just falls to the ground. It's untenable. So we have all of that. And then I guess you'd have to point to the economics. Maybe this could be merged under the first one. Maybe I should do that. But the idea that you would want to keep some semblance of personal dignity and a decent standard of living, which you never hear about or seldom hear about these days. But the idea would be, if you paid into Medicare all your life, you have a right to it. That's your money. If you paid all your life into Social Security, that's your money. If you're poor and destitute, Medicaid has to be there for you. If you're old and destitute, children's health care has to be provided by the government. That's Medicaid again. Once again, notice that the ones they're attacking, you've got to be able to get food stamps. You've got to be able to get all kinds of other assistance. You've got a Pell Grant if you want to go to college. You've got to have free, universal, quality, public, compulsory, quality, public education. All right? So these are the points. And this is Politics by Jake.